Permanent effect of this COVID-19 pandemic lockdown is a total collapse of our economic system. The Federal Reserve continually imprint trillions of fiat currency, dollars, just to save the falling stock market. In this period of pandemic lockdown, businesses are closed for days and probably months with no buy and sell transactions. This global pandemic lockdown controlled by governments will trigger the global currency reset. The US government itself has plunged into more than $30 trillion debt because of these bonds offered by privately owned Federal Reserve. This global pandemic lockdown will push world leaders to go back to gold standard because cash will soon become trash. We are coming to a time that dollar will no longer work the way it is, and the national currencies will have to look for the right basis of their market. This global financial crisis will eliminate the ruling oligarch system of the elite that controls the world, and soon, nations with assets of wealth such as physical metals like gold and silver shall become powerful. The Philippines has millions of gold reserves set up and preserved by President Ferdinand Marcos and can produce well-valued currency without depending on fiat currency, dollar. The petrodollar system is coming to an end. If world leaders will not facilitate this global transition, it will lead to another Great Depression. The question is, who holds the ownership of most of the world's assets? The answer is, the Philippines. Is it a coincidence? No, it is well planned. But the governments just waited for a global event crisis that will trigger this global financial collapse, and here it is. This COVID-19 pandemic shutdown is maybe that long-awaited triggering event, and as we currently see, the world's economies are currently facing global economic collapse. In these times, the wealth for humanity, the welfare of all nations, shall be badly needed, and this financial distribution will start right in this situation. A month-long economic shutdown will permanently paralyze the dollars. From the time of antiquity until forever, only the gold is the honored official standard for the production of currencies. And now, here's the time that every Filipino will know and finally acknowledge, even by opposers, the real unequal value of the brilliance of the late President Ferdinand Marcos, who safekept the world's assets in the World Bank's Global Debt Facility Trust account in benefit of the future Philippines and also of the whole world. This secret trust account, set up by Antonio Diaz and his brilliant lawyer Ferdinand Marcos in 1950, which contains the Merlacaz Royal Tolano family's million metric tons of gold, lent to the Vatican in 1940s and later returned to Manila, and was finally lent to the Central Bank of the Philippines, with Father Jose Antonio Diaz and his legal counsel, then attorney Ferdinand Marcos as the facilitators of this transaction. Later, the Central Bank of the Philippines became the de facto holder of these private wealth. In 1973, U.S. President Nixon, upon possibly hearing the secret news that President Ferdinand Marcos consolidated all these wealth in 1973 into one single account and put into final legality that all these wealth are owned by the people of the Philippine Islands, after he put the whole country under martial law, declared the devaluation of U.S. dollar and abandonment of gold as backup, making the Federal Reserve illegally imprint dollars without physical metal basis, but as cash bonds, traded in the form of debt, credit, therefore enslaving humanity with this burden of paying off debts from a fiat currency. The world's assets, secretly deposited by Diaz and Marcos in a trust account called Global Debt Facility at the World Bank in 1950, and which was later solely owned by Marcos as the legal successor of all these wealth upon the death of Antonio Diaz in 1973, was an enclosed deposit with 50 years contract. This contract ended in year 2000, plus 5 years, and so in the year 2005, all the accumulated interests of all these world's assets, Marcos' wealth of humanity, are due to be harvested by the Filipino people, since they were the ones indicated by Ferdinand Marcos as the co-signatory of this trust account, wherein 70% of its accumulated interest will go to them by the end. See how we owe so much to this great president. These wealth were not originally owned by the Filipino people, but came from the following sources. First, these were accumulated golds and wealth from the ancient empires of Srivijaya and Majapahit empires which existed and reigned in Southeast Asia centuries long before the Europeans first came here. These golds and wealth were owned by many of Majapahit nobility/royalty, clans represented by Dets, Rajas, Lakans, and many other kings, queens, and other royalties who ruled these ancient kingdoms in the Philippines, and of Metrolicons, middlemen, warriors, freemen, professionals, and traders who lived in the archipelago during and before Spanish colonization. One notable owners include the Tolano-Tejan royal family related to European British royalties, who possess millions of metric tons of golds and perhaps is sole owner of the original land title of the whole archipelago, which includes Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and Samar. The 640,000 metric tons of gold held in custody of Central Bank of the Philippines are owned by the Tolano clan. However, 30% of these golds were awarded by Tolano clan to Jose Antonio Diaz and his then hired lawyer, Ferdinand Marcos, as commission payment, because they're the ones who facilitated this transaction of gold between the Tolano family and the government of the Philippines. As a result, Diaz and Marcos legally own 192,000 metric tons of gold. Later, when Marcos became president, he withdrew their golds from Central Bank, minted them, sealed them with RPCB, and deposited them in different banks in different countries to earn interest and be used as metal backup for other currencies. These golds which they illegally owned earned enormous interests. Second, during World Wars I and II, the Axis powers, represented by the Nazi government of Adolf Hitler based in Germany, General Mussolini of Italy, and General Yamashita Tomoyuki of Japan, have looted up so many golds and riches from many different kingdoms and empires, and buried them in the hundreds of islands of the Philippines and Indonesia to safekeep them from eyes of the Allied powers, whom many have thought to be the saviors of humanity. Unfortunately, at the end of World War II, Yamashita returned to Japan but left all the looted golds in the Philippines and Indonesia, never to take them out again because Japan was bombed by the US. Ferdinand Marcos, who also happened to be a victim of Death March, also led a guerrilla group called Metrolika, which the US government keeps on telling the public that these claims are just hallucinations of Marcos, against the abusive Japanese during their occupation of the Philippines, perfectly knew about these vast wealth buried in many caves and hidden underground bunkers made by Japanese armies as hiding places of these enormous amount of looted golds and other wealth such as diamonds, emeralds, and other precious stones. Later, when Marcos became president, and in his second term, he thought he needs to declare martial law to take over the whole country so he can silence the US, fed insurrections and rebellions, and at the same time he has enough time to recover all these so-called Yamashita's treasures. His seeming mindset was that any golds and wealth buried in Philippine territories, whether they are Yamashita's looted golds, natural deposits, or owned by some royal families in the Philippines, are belongings of God alone and should be used for the welfare of all God's creation, including the whole humanity. With that in mind, Marcos, during martial law, did all his best to recover all these wealth. He used all his political will, coupled with his intelligence, motivated by a firm vision with the welfare of his motherland in mind, to recover all these wealth and secure them, and consolidate them, even to the point of sacrificing his own reputation and honor just to make sure that these wealth shall be held in his custody for the future of the Philippines. Third, the ancient wealth kept by King Bernardo Carpio, which were securely hid in the caves of mountains in Montalban, Rizal, and other wealths hidden in mountains of Arayat, Mecali, and other locations. These other enormous wealth, safe kept by lady shamans named Maria Inquan and Maria Mecalin during the period of Spanish occupation of the Philippines, were recovered by Antonio Diaz. Later, historytellers mythified the real stories about Bernardo Carpio, Maria Inquan, and Maria Mecalin in order to hide or conceal their real identities from the general public, and also the wealth entrusted to their custodies by the Creator. Today, these people and their stories were absorbed into Philippine culture and dismissed as folklores, myths, and urban legends. The enormous wealth of King Bernardo Carpio, found in Montalban caves, includes Mongolian treasures of the great Mongolian Empire of old times. Included also were ancient paper documents, maps, and golds from the ancient kingdom of King Solomon, the Alpha Omega ring, which has traveled the periods of antiquity from the time of Adam, then to Enoch, Noah, Shem, Joktan, David, and Solomon. Remember that after the great flood during Noah's time, the grandchildren of Noah and his son Shem and grandson Joktan, called Ether, Tarshish, Havilah, and many others, according to the Bible, went to the Far East, settled in the Isles of the Seas. This brings us to the truth that the Philippine archipelago, the ancient Oriental/Eastern Islands, were the homelands of Noah's great-grandchildren. The Alpha Omega ring was later turned over by Ferdinand Marcos to Queen Elizabeth II. These ancient wealth, divinely protective and miraculously survived ages, by the power of the Almighty God, were also divinely protective away from the hands of God's enemies. This evil group was mentioned in the Bible as children of the devil, the descendants of serpent through Cain, also called serpentine bloodline or reptilian race, which in the ancient times were worshippers of Baal, hence, the old Babylonian kingdom. Now, they are represented by elitists of strange ancestral domain, controlling the whole world by a network of global corporate control. In the book of Revelation, this group was called the synagogue of Satan, who call themselves Jews even though they're not. These are the satanic cult who holds and controls everything in the world today, through the network of global control, by media, big pharma industry, entertainment/Hollywood industry, liberal political parties, central intelligence, black market, capitalism, communism, and all other anti-God movements. Unfortunately, the Roman Catholic Church and many other religions and church denominations has been hijacked by these elitists/black nobility and has made the Bishop of Rome as their mere outward puppet, used as instruments to deceive humanity by false teachings and false hopes, so they can advance their goal of setting up the new world order and install the man of sin, the son of perdition, the seed of the serpent, called Antichrist. Through the brilliance of a man known as Father Jose Antonio Diaz de la Paz, rumored as the Philippine national hero Jose Protasio Mercado/Jose Rizal, who did not die in Bagambang at age 35, but was actually exiled or transported in Europe. All these wealth were consolidated and secured, and he became the holder of all these assets. Jose Antonio Diaz and his then hired personal lawyer, Ferdinand Marcos, has had to use many pseudonyms and aliases to hide their real identities to make all these assets protected from the eyes and hands of the elite who wants to control the world, the group who will install the Antichrist in the very near future. In 1973, the dying old man Antonio Diaz transferred all these huge assets into the custody of President Ferdinand Marcos, who was his legal counsel and personal lawyer in his later life. Marcos then became the sole owner and successor of interests and rights of the old man, and all the documentation was made, but they used another Marcos pseudonym as signatory and claimants. Marcos then by all means became not just the legal counsel of all these wealth of Diaz, but also the recipient and successor of all these assets. The intelligence of Marcos angered his enemies because he used his mind so advanced as if he already saw the future, so all his actions and plans should be made in a way that is secretive. If you know what kind of brain a chess champion has, that's how Marcos operated all his transactions. He knew how his enemies will later pursue these tremendous wealth, so he made a last will and testament declaring the people of the Philippine Islands not just as co-signatory of this trust account, but also the recipient and beneficiary of all these wealth and all its interests, which will be earned and accumulated in the World Bank within the span of 50 years. The Filipino people then, together with Marcos as prime holder, became the legal holder of all these gargantuan wealth. Included in Marcos' heroic act is when he had taken back the original Torrens title of the whole archipelago of the Philippines after the original land title was sold by trader Emilio Aguinaldo to the US government after the Treaty of Paris. This original title was declared null and void, but the brilliant mind of Marcos finally claimed the Torrens title and declared it as the official property of the Philippines. Marcos was a real hero, a great hero indeed. These wealth are all ready for disposal since it became fully matured in 2005, but it takes a presidential decree from the highest leader of the land to create a committee that will enact its distribution and implementation. These cannot be done without a presidential act, thus, a Marcos-backed Malacanang palace is the only option necessary to make all these things implemented for the welfare of our country. This is why every patriotic Filipino should stand united behind Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos, Jr. in his advocacy to implement the last will and testament of his late father. Thank you. Don't forget to like and share this video to all your friends so that their minds will finally be open. Not all will believe, but the wise shall understand. Thank you, and kindly subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to receive notifications of our videos update. God bless the Philippines. God loves the Filipino people.